the communications model. And I'm Sue Haswell, and we have Andrea Sandiford. Andrea, please would you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Andrea, and I'm 16 years. I taught in primary education and then children with social, emotional and behaviour difficulties. And I spent 10 years in children's services supporting our most challenged families. And now I'm back in education as a partnership officer working for a local authority. And I'm really excited to be here today to look at one of these coaching modalities, to look at how it can really empower and equip our teachers to enable our children to be the best version of themselves and to learn and just really impact positively in the classroom. And what I love about these techniques is they are so simple and, just a small thing that can make a massive change. So thank you for having me, Sue.
Brilliant. Thank you for being here, Andrea. I'm a NLP trainer, an NLP master, practitioner trainer. My background is corporate communications, and actually I've used NLP all through all of the corporate communications. So that's working with major organizations, often dealing with crisis communications and enabling them to get their messages out. I train all sorts of things now, and I'm also a mental health practitioner, and I work in many areas, including laughter yoga. We were having a laugh earlier, and also we were saying that we're not going for polished here, are we, Andrew? We're just going for a space that is going to be a learning situation and offering some great tools for people.
Absolutely, because I should have mentioned that I'm trained as an NLP coach and practitioner, and what I learned through my training was when people tried to get the model perfect, they started to question themselves and they got anxious about it. And this isn't about doing things perfectly, it's about exploring them from yourself, making them personal to you, because we're all individual and we all have our own language uses, we all have our own ways of doing things, and just getting comfortable with it. But I think the technique today is about awareness raising. So it's not necessarily something that you would use, but you would use for yourself, if you see what I mean. But I do think if you teach children this and they start to learn to understand how how communication works for them and what might be happening in their brains when they're listening to things, I think that's empowering too.
Absolutely. There's so many training courses that I've delivered where people have said, I wish I'd learnt this in school.
Yes.
And I wish they would teach my children in school. I wish people would learn it. And there are so many empowering techniques that come through from NLP. And the communications model is absolutely one of those core techniques
Yes.
that are just brilliant to know. And it's one of those things that you kind of can't unknow.
The penny drops, though, doesn't it? When you start to when you look at this and you go, do you know what, that makes so much sense? And it's a really empowering model, because you can then distance yourself from what's happening and think, oh, what's that about? And you can do something about it. And this will all become clear. It probably doesn't sound very clear at the moment, but it will all become clear as we go through the model.
Absolutely. So shall we go for it?
Yes.
Brilliant. So we have some slides because it's quite a complex model. So we've got some slides to show you how it's all going to work. I'm going to screen share right now, and you will see these slides come up. So I've done the screen share in this way so that we can go backwards and forwards through the slides as and when we need to. As you can see, it's the NLP communications model, and I just want to start with this particular saying, which Andrea said to me earlier. Andrea, you got it perfectly.
I think this is the thing is, miscommunication happens all the time, and we know that we can sit in the same conversation, be in the same room as somebody and take something completely different away from it. And the other thing we can do is we can get offended easily by something because we've attributed meaning to it, and that's not what at all the person intended who was making the comment or the observation or the conversation. And it's about a lot more. It's about what's going on inside our minds when we're actually communicating. And I think the other thing is we can't not communicate. So it's all on the non-verbal as well, which is a whole other plethora of complication. But even when we're saying the right things, our face can be, or our body can be giving completely different signals. So it's no wonder we trip ourselves up in communication.
Completely. And I was so impressed, Andrea, because you said all of this to me earlier, these exact words. And I was like, wow, she's managed that without. Do you want to have another go, or am I putting the pressure on too much for here?
Oh, I don't know. I know that you believe you understand what you think that I said, but I'm not sure that what you heard is not what I meant.
Yeah, a complete mind mess. And yet often we don't even think that. We just actually think we've said something, it's come out of our mouth and people have got it and they've completely understood it. And we're about to show you that that's absolutely not the case. So, because I'm sure some of you might have actually had the experience of not quite being understood or heard in what you were saying. So first of all, a quick look at how we take in the world. There are many other ways that we take in the world. We have a sense of space, a sense of gravity, a sense of what's right and what's wrong. The key things, though, for NLP, and to just keep things really simple here, is VACOG. And the way that we take in the world and experience the world are these 5 main senses. So we've got visual, what we see; auditory, what we hear; kinesthetic, what we feel, and that could be emotional and actually what we are feeling; olfactory, so what we smell; gustatory, what we taste. And the really interesting thing about these is that we don't often have an awareness of them for a start, and yet to have an awareness of them can improve our communication with somebody. So when we recognize that people sometimes have preferences which can be context dependent or can be broad, there are preferences though. So when you notice that someone keeps saying things like, oh, I see what you mean there, yeah, I'm getting a really clear picture, I can really see this, chances are they've got visual preferences. And the chances are someone with a visual preference speaks a lot quicker and is just a little bit higher pitched. The next one, auditory. If you've ever heard someone say, oh yeah, I can hear that, I hear exactly what, oh, that rings a bell. All of these auditory words start to go, okay, maybe they're a bit auditory, they've got that preference. Or someone is maybe speaking a little deeper and maybe saying things like, you know what, that really touched me, I can really feel that, I get a gut reaction for it, then mostly kinesthetic. And they're probably going to be speaking a little bit more breathy, a little deeper. So just noticing those. I mean, of course, there's also olfactory, you know, that doesn't smell too good, and gustatory, I don't think they've got any taste.
That stinks.
What was that, Andrea?
That stinks.
That stinks, yes. So just noticing those is interesting to do. Get curious about noticing them. It's also something you can do to really improve your communication with somebody if you wanted to hook into it. And if you notice someone is, for example, mostly visual, then if you're speaking to them in visual terms, or going one step further and showing them diagrams or pictures, giving them that can be really helpful. Auditory, when you recognize someone's more auditory, if you're extending your communication into telling them stories and anecdotes and metaphors, then that can really work with an auditory person. And for kinesthetic, actually just doing hands-on stuff, working with things that are really practical, that can support kinesthetic much more than the others.
I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's a nice little thing you can do for yourself here, is just listen to your friends and family, and you'll start to pick up on these key phrases. And after this, a load will probably spring to mind. See, that for me spring to mind. I'm kinesthetic. So I started to become aware of it in myself, just talking with you now, Sue. But it becomes it's a bit of fun. But then, like you say, if you use those words back to that person, you gain more of a rapport and a relationship and a deeper. And we know in a classroom, we know classrooms are busy, and this is just good classroom practice. But the more you use wider language preferences and wider techniques, you can build that rapport more closely with all the members of your classroom. But it is really interesting once you start hearing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Andrea said, to use all of them, all of those terms can really hook into everybody. And so it's kind of almost calling yourself out, going, oh, am I being overly visual? Let's use some of the others. They might feel a bit unnatural to begin with, but you'll find terms all over the place that you can just hook in and go, well, I'll try that out and see how that works. So moving then on to the communications model, because this is how communications work, isn't it? Something happens and we notice something's happening, and then we think really hard and well about our options, and then we respond logically. Is that how it works for you, Andrea? I know that that's absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I always respond logically, and I love the title to this slide, how we might think we communicate. And we all think we communicate this way, we take it in, we're rational, we respond logically. Well, possibly respond logically. Well, we do respond logically to us. It's logical to us based on what we thought up here and what we've made sense of to ourselves. So to us, it might be logical. To the other half that's being screamed at, it might be completely irrational. And we've all been there, haven't we? We've all been there where we've had we've taken something the wrong way, or we've misinterpreted something, and our logical response on reflection was a little bit different.
Absolutely. And the fun thing is, everybody thinks everybody else responds in this way. So when we get a response back from someone, we're like, oh, well, of course, that's what they think logically. And we completely forget that actually that rarely happens. So rare. And the world would be an amazing place if that was exactly how it happened. Unfortunately, this is what happens. So here we start with, let's start here. Something happens, and we take that in with VACOG. We take that in visually, auditorily, kinesthetically, olfactorily, or gustatory. We take in all that information. So that thing happens. We notice at some level. We might not even notice it consciously. It might be something that's happened and our unconscious has just taken that in. Remembering we take in plus or minus 7 pieces of information consciously. Our unconscious takes in thousands. So we're noticing it at some level. And then that gets filtered through all of our past experiences. It goes through our filters, and the filters are based on our past experiences, our beliefs, our values, all sorts of things, everything that's gone on in the past, including our education. And through those filters of our past experiences, we then delete things. We just take things out of the situation completely. We just ignore really vital information. We just don't notice stuff. And then we distort things. So we can distort things. We can see a piece of rope lying on the floor and think it's a snake, or we can see a bin bag flapping around on the road and think it's a cat. Or we just distort stuff, and then we generalize it. So suddenly we're using things like, oh, you always do that. This always happens. That never do. So we generalize it because we go for a shortcut, because our brain works fast in order for us to do what we need to do. We go for the shortcut, and the shortcut is not always right, which is a generalization itself. Then all of the filters creates an internal picture story, an internal representation. So we make it mean a thing in our own mind. And when we made it mean a thing, then all of that creates an emotional state. So we might go into anger, or we might go into stress, or happy, or a bit sad. We go into a state, and then Then we do that communication, we do some behaviour, we do whatever we're going to do. And all of this happens in a fraction of a second. It is so fast that we don't even recognise this happening for ourselves. It just starts. By the time it's finished, we're there reacting, not responding, and we're not getting the best from ourselves. And yet we expect everybody else is doing the best that they can. So we judge others by their behaviour, and we judge ourselves by our intent. Oh, I didn't mean to shout, but they're shouting, and we're judging their behaviour as opposed to their intent, which all makes it even more complex.
When you start looking at the model, it's a wonder that any of us manage to communicate at all. But if we take this back to like thinking of like how we delete, distort, and generalize things, you might hear children say, "I'm no good at this," or "I've never done that," or "Nobody likes me," or this, you know, and you'll hear always, everybody, that never, all those, you know, quantitative statements that as just a sweeping brush. So my class never listen, that kind of thing. Now, the difficulty with these, and again with the deletion, it's all about your brain trying to support all these pieces of information that you're getting. So it makes it make sense. It puts it in those filing cabinets. So it deletes the stuff it doesn't think is important, as you say. It distorts things into what makes sense to you. And as you've said, Sue, what I think is really fascinating is we judge ourselves by our intention. I love that. But when somebody else does it, we judge their behavior. So I didn't mean to offend you. They're shouting at me. It's their fault they're shouting, not, oh, it might be about how I've communicated something, or it's something that's going on in their mind that means that they've made sense of that piece of information this way. And one of the things I find with children is, and particularly teenagers, that as a teacher, or let me take that back a step. In our classrooms, we're seeing a lot of children in high anxiety states or high stress states at the moment. We're seeing more complex behaviours. We're seeing more incidents of fight, flight and freeze in the classroom. And these can look very different in different ages. I mean, fight speaks for itself, flight speaks for itself. Flight can also be avoiding confrontation. It can be backing down, it can be all that sort of thing. Fighting might be a child actually physically, internally fighting to stay in your class, but you wouldn't be aware of it. But when we look at teenagers, it can also come out in freeze, where they're looking flatly at you, you're getting no response, and there's nothing. When you've ever argued with somebody, I mean, for me, I find that's what I find the most disempowering, is when I'm not getting a reaction or response from somebody, because I don't know where to go with it. And it can seem like they're being belligerent, but actually they're overwhelmed and they're shut down. And that's not always because of that. It's not always because that moment and what you've said, but it's because of everything else that's going on in their brain. And at that moment in time, that brain has taken that information, processed it, and gone, that's enough, shut down. So, and then we end up in that pattern of treating the behavior. We react to the behavior that we're seeing rather than the root cause. And I think what's so empowering for a teacher in this model, and also for our children, I think particularly your teenagers, if you share this with them, is that you can take that personal out of the model. So as a teacher, it's really hard when you've got that child who always seems to be pushing your buttons. Now, that child isn't deliberately trying to push your buttons. That child is trying to make sense of what's going on for them. They're not sat there thinking, right, how can I wind them up today? They're really not. So it's like you recognizing that in the model and thinking about how you communicate, how you take that information, because it is just information, how you take that information and how you can change things up in terms of that relationship. And again, you will do this yourself. You will have those children where you're generalizing about their behavior. So we talked earlier, didn't we, Sue, about, somebody in your classroom who's always disruptive. So you're on high alert for that disruption, and your brain is going to generalize, distort. It's going to delete the times when that child's not being disruptive. It's going to distort when they are being disruptive to make it massive. And because you're adding it onto all the other times they disrupted your lesson, you're not just this one-off, you're going to add it to that mountain. And you're going to generalize that child is always, and also you're going to generalize that they're doing it on purpose. So when you know that you're looking out for that, then challenge yourself to look for the stuff you're deleting. Look for the evidence of when they aren't disrupting your lesson. Look for the evidence of when it's that one-off and it's not that mountain. And look for the evidence of it's not about you. So again, it's so empowering. I think when you can let that go as a teacher and look at and take it as purely information and exchange of information, you can really change your practice to get the best out of that child.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrea. And as educators, you're managing lots and lots of people, all of whom are doing this pattern, all of whom are getting stuff in, deleting, distorting, generalizing, filtering it all, making stuff for themselves, and then all of which are doing some behavior, however that is. So taking that all on board is an enormous role, and I utterly get it when we can take the pressure off ourselves from it and supporting them by sharing this model so that they get it as well. It can be really helpful for conflict management in the classrooms too, to have those open conversations and to work through exactly what is being deleted, distorted and generalized.
You know, like when you're having a good day, you can just rationalize through stuff. And if somebody's a bit, well, you think they're being a bit naughty with you, whatever, you can sort of, you let it wash over you, and then you think about it later and think, oh, what else could it have been? It might have been this. Or later on down the line, it becomes apparent it was about something completely different. When you're having a good day and you're relaxed and you're prepared and you're in the zone, yeah, you can manage all that. But you know, in teaching, we know that the stress levels are high. You know, we're not sat here going, oh, this is dead easy to do. We know there's a lot of expectation. The demands on schools nowadays are incredible. And we know that there are times when we manage situations poorly because of where we're at. And that's not a judgment, and that's not saying that's the right or wrong thing to do. It's just where we're at. You know, we all do it. We do it in our personal life. But what this is good at is where you've particularly got, you know, for all of them, but also where you've particularly got that child, that one or two children that is taking up so much of your time, and that becomes all consuming. You can use this model to rationalize that and think, what else could it be? What else could it be? What else could it be? And it takes the pressure off you as well, and it takes that. It's nothing personal. It takes it out of the equation. And when you can do that, it is so empowering.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Andrea. So we've covered the model. And now we have, just for you, we've got this bonus material for you, haven't we, Andrea?
Yes.
So the deletion, distortion and generalization. 3 little areas that you can just use. Maybe not so little, actually. 3 little exercises that you can use to remind yourself. Some of them you could even take into the classroom, it depends. But first of all, deletions. What I'm going to invite you to do, and I will also do it, is to close your right eye. So just shut your right eye and then look across to your right with your left eye. And what you'll notice there is a large, bulbous, fleshy object. Open your eyes again.
That's a bit rude.
I know. It's your nose. And we walk around with this thing on the front of our face all of our lives, and yet we don't notice it. We have got complete blind spots for our own nose.
So if you're watching this at home or school or wherever you happen to be, in your car, I don't know, you won't be looking at your nose unless you're now going cross-eyed. It's always there.
Yeah,
but like
exactly.
you say, our brains delete key words, key information.
Yeah.
And it's incredible what we end up deleting, and particularly if we're not fully listening as well. And think about the times that we actually listen with intent. and that our minds aren't wandering. I mean, it's a big skill, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then the awareness to bring it back,
Yes.
to go, what have I deleted? What have I missed here?
What information have I not got?
Yeah. And
What
what
have I
information?
assumed?
Yes.
Assuming is a really good one, isn't it? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, absolutely.
or
And
mind reading.
oh, all the time.
Yeah.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah.
So that is your deletions, and it's cool exercise. Feel free to do that with your people, with your learners. Next one then is distortions. So, Andrea, I'm going to read you a little story. I'm going to tell you something, and I'd love to hear what you think of it. And everybody there, what might you think has happened? So, Jamie has just walked into the room and seen Alex sitting there with an annoyed look on their face. Jamie immediately thought about what happened yesterday. What might Jamie be thinking?
I think, you know, you're going to walk into that situation, the person looks at you, you see that on the face, you're going to think it's about you. And if something happened yesterday, you're going to be thinking it's about that. So you've already put this meaning and value and that distortion onto this whole scenario without even uttering a word.
Yeah. So you've walked in, and there's Jamie, Alex, with a really it's going to be all about you, isn't it?
Yeah. And it never is. And it might be like Alex has just seen on his phone, he's been dropped from the football team.
Exactly.
You know?
Or his match has just his team has just lost in the Euros. What something's, yeah.
So I think about the McFly song, It's All About You, because, you know, I'm a princess and it is all about me. But actually, it's a hard lesson to learn that it's really often never about you. So it's that assumptions. And again, I suppose that's where we ask those questions, don't we? Is it that? What else could it be? What information do I need? Could I be distorting this?
Exactly. And you know what, going back to that, we're always communicating. Whatever's going on, we're leaking stuff constantly. So just a facial expression that's just a bit off, actually, is that directed at you, or is that person just stubbed their toe?
Or is it just their face?
Yeah, yeah,
I get
it's one of
accused.
those
I get
faces.
accused of it all the time. So I smile a lot. I smile a lot, so people know I'm okay, and I'm not offended by them. But then you can look like a crazed person if you're always smiling.
I promise you, you don't look crazy. You look good, Andrea. So we've done deletion, we've done distortion, and the next one is generalization. Because we generalize information. Again, our minds are constantly seeking that shortcut. We just want to know what it is, deal with it, and off we go, and everything's all good. So it means that we generalize things. And we end up using things like the words always and never, and yeah, that always happens. And we just totally generalize. Everything suddenly becomes black and white.
Yeah,
Nobody,
it's
everybody.
all those extremes. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
And there's a massive chunk of grey somewhere in the middle between the black and white. So let me share an example of a generalisation that I think a lot of us might hold. And that is that all teenagers are always playing with their phones.
And I reckon a lot of people now will be thinking, yeah, that's true. And actually, as a parent, I think that, and and when I've challenged my child about how often they've been on the phone, they've actually turned around and gone, oh, well, I'm on my banking app, or I'm looking this up, or I've just found this out, or I'm researching this, and so it isn't always about playing. It isn't always about mindless scrolling,
Yeah,
you know, and sometimes it is, but
yeah,
not always. And I think it's that thing of, you know, when we say you're always doing that, they're always disrupting, they're never listening. Nobody does this for me, or everybody does that against me. Looking for the evidence of, well, has there been a time when somebody has done that for you? Has there been a time where they're not always disrupting, like we said earlier? Has there been a time when they've been helpful if they're always unhelpful? If that, and you can do this with other staff members as well. If you've got a particular staff member who you might not be gelling with and you think, well, they're always putting barriers up or they're always negative, can you find a time when they haven't been negative? And that might not be related to work. It might be them talking about something they've done at the weekend. But by challenging your brain to accept that there could be an alternative, you're opening up. Because when you do those extremes, you completely narrow down, like you say, it's black or white. And you narrow down your options, and then you will narrow down your reactions, your responses, and your behaviors. And that's when we don't have rapport. That's when relationships break down, or there's that gap between us that we can't seem to cross. And it just makes, in not just with the children, but in all our relationships, professional, personal, challenging yourself to think, catch yourself using those words, always, never, but everybody, somebody, nobody, all those extremes, the black or the whites. When you find yourself using those words, just become aware of it and get curious as to, what's that about? Can I think of a time when the opposite has happened?
And it frees you up, doesn't it? It just frees the mind.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what? It is possible that they are always doing it. It's possible. What we're doing though is actually just freeing our own minds up and allowing ourselves the air in order to just consider how better to deal with the situation, how we can change our communication in order to get a better result, because isn't that what we all want and need?
And it's that kind of thing, like we get what we expect.
Yeah.
So if we're going in with a loaded mindset, as it were, or loaded communication, we are going to get back exactly what we've communicated, aren't we?
Absolutely.
So if we communicate,
they're always playing on their phone. There's no point in talking to them. Let's just not bother. They're addicted to it. They're always on it. We'll leave them in their room. Actually, suddenly we've just shut down ourselves and we've shut down their possibility. Whereas if we just had some reflection and some insight, we could open things up and just get a better result for everybody.
Yeah, better relationships, better communication. You get in that flow with each other. That trust becomes there because you're expecting more. You're expecting better. You're expecting different. It's just so empowering. And again, just becoming self-aware of how you communicate, what your models are, whether you're visual, auditory, kinesthetic, becoming aware of other people around you. What else could it be? Are we using these, these generalizations? What are we distorting? What are we deleting? And,
and also, Andrea, using it for yourself.
Yes.
So when we're saying to ourselves, oh, you know what, I always fail at that, there's no point. Or I can never do that.
Yes.
I can never really understand.
And you're going to get
doing that. Let's unpick all of that and be kinder to ourselves as well, because we've got a whole internal communication going on as well as the stuff that's going out. So actually unpicking it for ourselves can work better for us.
What I found really interesting is when you start looking at language and communication, I use the word just a lot, and just isn't one of those undermining words. So if I'm doing an email, I'm just inquiring about this, and I've started to take it out. I'm inquiring about this. I just wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you. Just, I'm using it, taking the word just out, changes that sentence from an apologetic one, I'm sorry to bother you, to an empowering one. I'm asking for this, and I'm valid in asking for this. I'm not asking you for anything horrible. I'm asking you for this. So using those words and thinking about the words that you say to yourself. And I've also started using the word yet. So in that voice in your head, when you're struggling with something, you're saying, I can't do this yet. I'm not the person who achieves that yet. And yet opens up possibility.
Absolutely. And for you and for everyone that you're dealing with, it's so empowering linguistically. Andrea, thank you so much.
No, it's been a pleasure as always. I hope this video helped you. Your mind will be full now of noticing things. So good luck with it, and good luck in your classrooms.
Thank you.